Oh, hello, Michelle.
Hi, Cheryl.
It's
Delighted to be
hi.
here.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you again. Thanks, firstly, for taking the time to speak to me. Just to let everyone know for context, Michelle and I met maybe 2 years ago, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years
Free?
ago, 3 years ago, at the Every Woman in Technology Awards, and we chatted and connected and just got on really, really well. And then about a year ago, Michelle and I were having a chat about women in tech and in the industry, what needs to be done to improve, the conditions for women. And one of the thoughts that we had was why the system needs to change and not the individual. So I reached out to Michelle last week. I was like, "Hey, Michelle, I'm doing this article," and you actually came back to me and said, "This is such a huge topic. It's so important. I think we need to do a video." Hence the reason that we're here now recording. So yeah, I guess we had a little bit of chat just before the video started, and I guess yeah, one of the questions is, what what are the barriers that women are facing today in the industry?
Yeah. I think one of the barriers is that people actually think things have really improved and that there's no issue. And yes, of course, there is a lot of improvements. Sometimes there's some backward sliding as well. In the last year with the geopolitical situation, that is the case. But I also think that sometimes people just say, well, that's not a problem anymore, and they're oblivious or just not aware of the challenges that women can face in the tech industry. Um, I think the answer to that always is, what does the data tell you? If you look at the numbers and you say this is not representative, um, I think also, like, connected to that is lack of knowledge of the history of women in tech. Women have always been involved in tech and have, tech was actually there was a lot more women early days. So, I think mid 80s is the highest number of women doing computer science, and it then suddenly went off a cliff. So, thinking, and that was to do with, at that time, things like Revenge of the Nerds and women in tech being depicted as frumpy and not a cool person, so that has prevented women from seeing themselves there. So, I wrote an article on where did the women go, because of and I literally spent a weekend researching it when I was supposed to be doing a college assignment. But it's just so interesting, and to see all these amazing women that had such an impact on tech, and a lot of people don't know about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess you're asking about the barriers, like, I think flexibility is number one, because, and we were talking about that a little earlier, and that can be down to, like, flexibility about where and when you work. When you have meetings at 8 a.m., and the team getting together in the pub always, things that it's exclusion, not inclusion, and not making it possible for people. And I don't know if you've come across Steve Shirley. She died last year. She was Dame Stephanie
Yeah.
Shirley, and she had a huge impact on women in tech. She set up a company years ago where only women were employed. And she said, and then we had Equality Act and we had to start to employ men now. But basically she hired women that were not wanted by other orgs because they wanted part-time hours or they wanted to work from home. And she had loads of women working from home back in the 60s, really, really successful, huge business. And she saw what was possible then. But now, if you think about RTO mandates, um, Hee Jung Chung, she's amazing. She's done a lot of research on the stigma of working from home, and if it's only seen as an opportunity for women, that actually stigmatizes it. So it's really important to actually have it as an opportunity for everyone. And when you have flexibility for everyone, everyone benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And if, like you say, it does need to, you can't just think about women and say this is for you. It is for everyone. I listened to one of your podcasts recently, and something that stuck out for me was that you said that people don't mind change. It's not change that people mind. It's if it's enforced change that people mind. And I thought that was really interesting. So that got me thinking, like, if we kind of say like it's the system that needs to be changed, but if people don't like the enforcement of it, what ways do you think that I guess that what you said, like including like everyone, like it's not just for women, but what else I guess could we do? Because it's the system we're talking about, and not the individual. So yeah.
Yeah. Like I think so I was the co-lead of a Women and Allies employee resource group. But we also created a Women in Tech group, which was a safe space for women to support one another. And I think there's a need for both. But really, if you want change, everyone needs to be part of it. Men need to be part of it. Men need to be part of the gender equity conversation. And the patriarchy doesn't serve men either. Most men aren't happy with the way the system is. They sometimes don't even question it. Often fathers don't get, or they get a lot of resistance when they want to take parental leave or paternity leave. Um, and why should they not be able to spend time with their child as well? I think it's not serving them either. Um, I think I'm a big fan of Marianne Seagart, the book The Authority Gap, and she talks about the data on it's like 96% success when men are part of the gender equity initiative, whereas it's like 30 something, I think, when women are just doing it on their own. So like you're not going to change it unless you have everybody part of the conversation. And when we're talking about like the inflexibility and the way it's set up, that's not just about gender, like it's all the other dimensions of diversity as well. A lot of the systems and organizations we work in, they were created by men for men around their needs. And they haven't sometimes considered even, is this working anymore? It's a woman I really really respect, Gillian Harford. She was the country head of 30% Club Ireland, and she often talks about we're working in systems designed by our grandfathers, and we're still continuing to think that this is working. So I really think if you want to make change, it needs to be, everyone needs to understand the benefit. And like there are so many benefits. The business case has been proven long ago, but I don't know why we literally just ignore that. When you think about systemic change versus individual change, you can have all these individuals trying to change themselves and they can burn out trying to do that, because if you don't change the system, they're still going to be, they're fighting it. And I compare it to resilience. When people say you need to be more resilient, when actually the organization needs to change its culture, people overworking to try and fit into the system.
Absolutely. And it's like we were talking about earlier. It's like you say, it's a system that's set up that your grandfathers, built. But today, as things are, two people need to go to work. You need to double the income because things are more and more expensive now. And you want to have people coming into the industry. You want to sort of like populate it. So you have to have the children. So how are you going to support families if they can't afford to raise their
Yeah.
families? Yeah, it's a crazy design. It's an old, outdated design, and people, there's so much more studies on people, human nature and everything, and not everyone's set up to do a 9 to 5. It doesn't suit some
Yeah.
people. It's not, it's yeah.
Yeah, and I
Anyway.
think also like connected to that was, with the pandemic, but I would have been working remotely some days a week in like back in as early as 2002, I think. And there was people on my teams that were working, like there was people working down the country that came up once a month to the office and they were top performers. So I knew what was possible, but there was a lot of people who never had the opportunity and then suddenly their eyes were opened. But the thing I would say is people who were neurodivergent, like I used to look around, and there is a lot of neurodivergent people in tech. I would look around and see so many people with headphones on all day trying to focus in a really noisy, open plan office. And suddenly these people were finding I can work so much better. I'm doing much better now that I've got flexibility to work from home. And then there's suddenly this thing where, well, this is the way I did it, and it worked for me. I'm going to force everyone else to come into the office 3 days a week or whatever. And I see loads of benefits to in-person interactions, but I think you can be intentional about it, and you can also give teams the autonomy to figure out what works for them. And like if you set the expectations, generally, again, it's like autonomy. People don't like being forced to do things. Even someone who wants to come into the office 3 days a week, when they're told they have to, they resist often, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, if you can get the best out of the people that work for you, because generally I think most people want the best for the company because they're proud of where they work, they're proud to support what their company do. So if you can get the best out of them by being flexible, why wouldn't you? Like, it
Yeah.
just,
It's
yeah.
interesting. Like I did a master's in work and organizational behavior, and my thesis was on how tech leaders build and maintain trusting relationships in remote and hybrid work environments. A mouthful. But one of the tech leaders I spoke to was saying that there was a woman that he worked with that he never saw. She kept her camera off all the time, and he came eventually to the conclusion. Somebody said to him, "You're the problem, not her. She's a really good performer. Why are you trying to force her into your norm?" And he said, I realized, yeah, I needed to meet her norm and get over it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of time people just they don't realize, because it's like that's the way I do it.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily anything like, intentional, but yeah, I think a lot of people just think, oh, well, it works for me. Why doesn't it work for you?
And I think some of that is like when you think about the core, like the system, the way it's set up, it is the default man. So that is the default, and anything else is other. So often men don't have to do as much thinking about others' perspectives because the default is their experience. So women have that, they have to have a broader perspective to understand, they have to understand the male perspective and theirs. And, as you think about women in color, that's even more, there's so much code switching, you have to think about all these different perspectives. But when you have that broad perspective, so you may be a little bit more curious about what others' experience is. You might ask more questions. Whereas sometimes, like men might just not even notice. They just
Mm,
think this is normal.
yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing, how the system kind of like is, I guess, like set up against flexibility in women is because I read it was a LinkedIn post and it was a Women in Tech newsletter, and it was called I wrote it down, Why Women Are Tired of Being the Change. And it said, like, women are they're expected to mentor, sit on DEI councils, speak at events, support cultural change on top of their core roles, but it's largely informal, unpaid, and unrecognized. And so when people say, and I think it's sometimes good to have like a something positive, but be the change you want to see. But then you think, but at what cost? Because yeah, be the change you want to see, but you can't do your core roles, sit on all these other events and panels. Because I've noticed a lot of women in tech events also are in the evenings because companies don't want to make space for them during the day because they're not seen as important. So you have to do that outside of your role. And yeah, I just think that it's kind of damaging, and there's consequences. Their own recognized labor, and there's burnout, and they already carry, like, women carry a dish, disproportionate amount of the unpaid work outside of work as well, like at home in caregiving roles. So that's just another dimension on top of it. Yeah.
I think that's such a valid point. And, I would have sometimes even hidden diversity work I did. I did it quietly behind the scenes, but because if you're seen too much in that light, then you're not seen as somebody who's focused on product delivery, which is your core role. And I think, like, imagine if you didn't have to use all that energy on this stuff. Imagine I did my job well. I was really happy with it, and I felt like I got a lot of positive feedback. Imagine if I didn't have to put all the energy into all that, how much better I could have even been. Or maybe not, because maybe that's all, it's you're balancing things and you get energy from it. I know that I got a lot of energy from coaching people, mentoring people, um, and I could see the impact that it had for them. But it can be exhausting and it can be disheartening as well because you feel like you're making all this progress, and like I would have gotten upset like when I saw I was out doing talks on diversity and gender equity and stuff, and then when I saw when we had to share the gender pay gap. I remember thinking, this is so disappointing how big the gender pay gap is for this organization that I believed was doing better than maybe it was. Um, and I think that, you know, I actually found out, I asked a question about this at one point, and I was saying I would like to get to the next level in an engineering leading role. And if I do, and I was asked, did I want to do more diversity work by my people leader? And I said, if I do that, how does that impact my path to, say, VP of engineering? And he said, it will slow it down. So he was honest, in fairness,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was like, well, I don't want to do that because, so I'll do what I'm doing in my own time as well as my core job, and I was leading large teams. There was a lot of pressure. So I think, if women only carry that, that has to impact their impact in like their success in their role. Like it's very hard to do everything.
Yeah.
And I think if it's not recognized, I think there is companies that do actually pay people for being on employee resource groups. I set up a lead. It's called the Leading Community, and it's bringing leaders together. I did it with Sarah Mullally of the Sustainable HRM SkillNet. And we had a launch event last year in July in Grant Thornton, Dublin, and they had actually gotten an award for their sustainability. And Anya, the woman who was speaking on their behalf, she was amazing. She was saying that they made it part of everybody's goals. It was like part of the strategy for the company. Everybody had sustainability as part of their goals. So everyone was bought into it. Everyone knew why it was important to the company. And that's how you make it more authentic,
Yeah, absolutely. You need, well, we talk about diversity and inclusion, so you need all the voices, and you shouldn't like single certain people out. And when women or men, because you do have male allies, do this work, it's also beneficial for the company because the company are seen as, well, you're really inclusive, you're really kind of like forward thinking, and an industry that moves quite fast and is quite innovative, like you need that kind of forward thinking. So yeah, why wouldn't you like include everyone? Because I think this personally, I think by doing that, it kind of makes the men understand, like what women are going through, and then they can sort of maybe empathize or sympathize, or because until you actually have to sit out there and do it,
Yeah.
you're never really going to know.
Yeah.
Don't send out the maybe the one female in your company to do all this representation. Send the men as well.
Totally. Like I would have helped men with when they were doing talks, they would have come to me and I was grateful that they came to bounce what they were going to say off me. And sometimes I'd say, well, I wouldn't say that now, so it would be helpful for them to learn. And they're like, what is the problem with that? And we'd have really good conversations about it. I think one of the workshops that I designed was how to be a great ally. And I asked men to share their experience and their learnings and, things, maybe mistakes they made or things that suddenly aha moments they had. And it was really impactful. It really helped. Like, it was great. I just loved, the women in the group loved hearing from the men about what had changed for them. But it was such a commitment to gender equity that they were willing to share these stories. And, they were sometimes saying, I screwed up and here's what I learned, which was really, really impactful for people.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I think it's important for to hear more of those stories as well, because we always hear, not 100% of the time, but we always hear of the women, the challenges they've been through and what they've done. But what we don't hear so much is what the men have learnt um when they're faced with it, and it's kind of like looking in the mirror and going, oh my God, I didn't realize this about myself. From that I've learned this. Because then it just kind of normalizes the conversation between men and women, and it doesn't have this kind of like line down the middle. It shouldn't be women one side, men the other side. It's working together for the benefit of as people in the companies that they work for.
Yeah, and I think everybody benefits from having that safe space where you're not shaming people, that you
Yeah.
have curiosity rather than judgment, and you're open to having those conversations where people say, I don't really get this. Can you talk to me about it? Now, I do also think that, in what you were saying at the start, often it does fall to women to educate men on gender equity. And I think they should actually, like, every man should be curious and should actually be educating themselves and taking the time to learn more about it, rather than just relying on women to say, well, explain to me why this is
Yeah.
important. But I think also, like, one of the things I would have seen was, um, maybe somebody we're hiring for a tech leadership role, and only the woman who's been coming for the interview only meets men through the interview experience, or they might meet a woman from the recruitment team.
Mhm.
And if you don't see any women in the process, what are you going to feel about joining that company? But then the tendency is then to, if there's less women there, those women have to do all the interviews. So then that puts more work on the women
Yeah.
again. But I think as you start to hire more women, then that helps. But a good few people have said to me that just in kind of what you just said a little while ago, a good few women have said to me, they joined the company because they saw me talking, and they said, okay, this must be a progressive company, and good to see. So it does benefit the company. They can hire more easily if they do get involved and support this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, I guess, do you think that, the current system can be fixed, or do we need a whole new system? That was one of my first thoughts when we were talking about this. Like, can it be fixed, or do we need a new system? Because, we all know the Lovelace report said, what was it? 40 to 60,000 women are leaving tech every year, and up to 30,000 of those, I think, are leaving the industry altogether. So, can it be fixed, or do we need to change it?
It's funny because I had a conversation with my daughter about this, and she said to me, the quote, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. So which is kind of scary. But I'm an optimistic person, and I think we need hope. And actually, Gallup had research last year which said that the number one thing that people need from leaders is hope. Number two was trust, which was interesting, but hope was number one. And I think there's a lot of things in the system that are not working, and yes, like, I think 50% of women leave tech by age 35. And women leave tech but don't leave industry. So they don't, it's not that they're not working. They are working, they're moving out of the industry. And I think, like, we've seen an increase in that kind of bro culture, and more overt sexism in the past year or more. And that is also quite, it's going to push people out. People are concerned with their health as well. Like, if you are in a system that it isn't built for you, and it doesn't want to know about what you need in it, like, eventually people go, do you know what, I'm going to create my own system. Um, there is a lot of people that do leave, but I think that, if I guess it's where there's a will, there's a way. Like, if you actually want to change the system, and if you have, I just think you need the key decision makers bought into it. And I think change in organizations has to come from the top. And actually, 30% Club, one of their they insist that for a company to be a member, they need to have the most senior person as the sponsor. So because they know that change won't happen unless it comes from the top. So you can have great initiatives, but you won't have effective change unless you have a buy-in from the top, and the leaders are really, really serious about it. And I also, like, one of the other things they talk about, and 30% Club was set up, and it's got uh, it's set up in many countries. The Ireland chapter is quite strong, um, but it was set up really with the to support organizations. It's a non-profit org to support organizations that want to go towards having 30% women in C-suite and board positions. And they've actually made a huge change. I think it was, like, when they started in Ireland, it was about 12% in board positions, women in board positions, and it got to 30, maybe 32% or something in the last couple of years. So they have actually really been able to make change when they've organizations that have bought into it, and really wanted to make the change. So I think that's necessary.
that's very necessary and really important. And it just goes to show that it can be done. So, yeah, other than that, like other practical steps do you think organizations can take to retain? We spoke about flexibility, but what else?
Yeah, like I think, well, roles of influence matter. So, you can say we're increasing our gender representation, but if women aren't in roles of influence, that can be a much slower change. I often talk about this, but I saw Gina Davis speak live a few years ago, and she talked about how, and we were talking earlier about the film industry and how she noticed how her daughter was watching things that where there was male leads, or the woman, if there was a woman, they were killed off early in the thing, or they were not depicted as very strong. And so she set up the Gina Davis Institute, which she works with directors in Hollywood to try and help increase the how women are seen in film and on TV. But one of the things she talked about was the CSI effect, and how the with CSI and different those kind of um, programs that women, the increase in women studying forensic science and doing can't think what the word is, but it increased by 300%. So it's not that you need the actual change, you just need to see what role models look like, and to see it on the screen, you can fast forward change by that. So I think that's so important, and it's a shortcut really.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And funny enough, I wrote an article about that.
Did you?
And yeah, I did, because I was like, film, I think we underestimate how much like film and everything has such a huge opportunity to be representative, and to show like women and women in engineering and that in a different light, and to represent everybody. And I think, yes, it's a huge opportunity. And like you say, it doesn't take much,
Yeah.
but it can change. Yeah, and I've heard that as well about like you said, the CSI effect. I think it was when the X-Files was on,
X-Files.
and
Yeah.
you had Scully, and everyone, it
Yeah.
was like, oh wow, this is amazing, and it just shot up. And it's so important, to have these strong women, these women of color, just
Yeah.
it doesn't,
And
it doesn't take much.
the other one that comes to mind is Hidden Figures. Every time I watch that, I'm just so inspired. But it's, that's one of the things. Stop underestimating women and actually notice what their contribution is. A lot of the time, I hear this often from leaders. Well, she's not ambitious. She hasn't asked to be promoted. And women are told not to rock the boat. They're socialized not to be troublesome. So they quietly get on with it and expect someone to notice. And when they do sometimes self-promote, that doesn't go down well often. And both women and men can be biased against women self-promoting. So, and I've had experience of that myself, where it took me most of my career to actually be able to do it. But I had a very negative experience with that recently, where somebody said I was self-promoting too much, and I was like, I have my own business. I have to self-promote. Like, it's literally how I will exist.
Yeah.
Um, but it's you do feel a bit like, oh God, I've broken the rules here, and there's a great podcast, The Brag, Leah Boyland, she interviewed me on it as well, where she's creating a platform for women to actually brag about their successes. But that's so not natural for us, because we're really just not allowed to. So I think with Hidden Figures, and seeing like the impact women did have on tech. And that's why I wrote that article, Where's the Women Go? Because there's so many women that have had such an impact. And if we knew about them, I think it could just change things. And I think it's a really small thing, but like parents, neighbors, family can have an impact on girls and women. They can make one throwaway comment that can put them off and think that there's no place for them in tech, or they can exclude their daughters from things they bring their sons to, like films and whatever. So really being really tuned into it, and thinking about the impact of the words we use really,
Yeah.
really matters.
Yeah, our actions and reactions, you're right, especially to like children are different to girls to boys. And I notice like a lot of my friends have boys, I have a girl. Even though I don't think that I raise her any differently, probably somewhere I do, because like I'm like, oh, be careful. And I'm like, oh, why am I saying this? Like, just go ahead. You need to get bumps and scrapes. And then I'm like, oh no, be careful. And I'm like, stop it. And I'll come back to something you was talking about earlier about promotion, and like when women are quiet and they get on with their jobs because they don't rock the boat, just crack on, your work will speak for itself. And this is another reason why transparency is really important, so that the steps that you need to take, and to say that these are the steps that I've done. I've ticked whatever these targets are off. This is what I'm going to do next. Because a lot of companies, it's not transparent. You don't know how to get certain. You don't know how to approach someone, for a promotion, or maybe you don't even have those conversations. So how would you start a conversation that you've never been involved with before? I spoke to the nicest woman that I've ever spoken to in my life. She works through uni, and what they do is they say, like, you have to go for a promotion. Like, it's part of the process. Like, you have to say, what have you done? Because it's to encourage them to say, think about what you've done, and now you have to go for it, and I think it's great. And it's, when we spoke, it seems to be working, women.
And I think leaders have a responsibility to understand the career aspirations of everyone who reports into them. And you should be proactively having those conversations to understand what people want and to help them to explore it. Like, coaching is such a good way to, to unlock your inner wisdom. And you and I were talking about thinking out loud and talking to think. Sometimes you don't know what you think until you say it out loud, nearly. And I had a funny experience doing the masters. In one of the modules, we were asked to think about our career, and I said to the group, and the lecturer heard me and laughed at me, I don't have a career anymore because I have my own business. And they were like, but you still have a career. I was like, no, I don't have a career anymore. And then I realized that my view of a career was corporate, with a big, very formal structure of, this is how you get promoted, that's the next level. So I viewed that as what career was. And then I went, yeah, of course I have. I don't know why I thought that. I didn't know I thought that until I said it out loud.
That's crazy, isn't it? And the thing is, your career that you're on now is a career that you're carving for yourself. So it's probably the best career.
I know, I couldn't, like, I was talking to you, if money didn't matter, I could not be happier, like, in what I'm doing now. I just really seen the impact. And, when you were talking about that, I was thinking, I run a workshop called Own Your Voice and Thrive. And it is based on all the stuff I wish I knew earlier in my career, and the kind of, the things where I thought, oh, I'm just not competent enough. I need to change. And often it's the system. And people have given me feedback that it made them wake up, and they've gone and had those conversations. And I've had a few people tell me they've gotten promoted based on that, which is the impact that I'm trying to have,
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing, I listened to a really interesting podcast, Alison Daminger, I think is her name. And she wrote a book called What's on Her Mind. And she talked about the cognitive labor that women do. And so even if it's all I need to remember the birthdays, I need to organize, who do we need to buy presents for Christmas? Have we ordered the groceries? And even if, and she found that in heterosexual couples, mostly it was the woman and that carried that, but a lot of them put it down to personality. So they said, well, she's just like really organized. She's a bit of a control freak. So they put it down to personality, but actually it was a gender thing mostly.
Yeah. And the thing is, someone has to be.
Yeah.
Someone has got to be. Yeah, absolutely.
And often the male in the couple, if it was a heterosexual couple, was a very high, functioning person in the workplace. They often could be like a project manager. So they had the executive function to do the stuff that they then said, oh, she's just better at it, when they were outside of work. So it was just a norm that had been created.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to just, you shouldn't assume anything, just because someone does it. No one's born with those powers. You have you learn them because you have to do it to get by, because if you didn't do it, everything would fall apart. Well, thank you so much. We are at time. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. If anything resonated, then it'd be great to hear from anyone. But in the meantime, Michelle, it was really lovely to talk to you.
You too,
thank you
Cheryl.
for taking the time.
I always love our conversations.
Me too.